Hi, how are you? And welcome to another podcast by George. Well, we're back. We're back on the campus of Drake University, and we're talking to Jennifer Konfrst. And this is going to be a great podcast. I'm very interested in doing this because she's a fascinating individual with a lot of irons in the fire. But most notably, she is a newly elected member of the Iowa legislature, winning a House seat out of Windsor Heights, a small community kind of between the powers of Waukee and Des Moines. Jennifer, would you say that? How do you describe Windsor Heights to folks?
Windsor Heights is one of those great 50s communities that's bloomed in the 50s, and it's landlocked now, but the homes are really well built, and so now younger families are starting to move into those to Windsor Heights, and it's really been fun to watch it evolve. I also represent portions of Clive, all the Polk County parts of Clive, and then some parts of West Des Moines. So it's really the western sort of straight out suburbs of Des Moines.
Yeah, well, I want to talk about that at length here, but I want to kind of introduce you a little bit by way of your bio. Again, I picked this up off the internet, so I'm just going to kind of try to summarize this a little bit. Jennifer's lived in Iowa most of her life. She's considered the Des Moines metro area her home, though. Lived in northern Iowa and out of state for a short time as a child, but returned to Iowa and went to school up in Johnston. She graduated in 1992 there. Met her husband at Drake University, has a degree in journalism and a master's degree. Is that in journalism also?
It's in public administration.
Okay, public administration. Just to read some of these other highlights from her bio, a big family person. She states that she's always believed that family and being a mom's the most important part of her life. She served as president of the Plymouth Nursery School Board, president of the Downtown School PTA, mock trial coach at Merrill Middle School, and now a member of PTA and a debate team parent volunteer at Roosevelt High School. So good on you. She's also currently an assistant professor at Drake University. Get this, she runs her own small business, helping people in private and public sectors improve communication with their own customers and clients. So spent 12 years in the communications leadership area of Iowa Public Television. I worked on a public television show that's currently airing on public TV. So our paths are kind of crossing here, different generations, but some similarities in the background. So that was at IPTV. She was a spokesperson for the channel, an on-air host doing fundraising drives, and worked on special programs during the Iowa State Fair. She's worked in the private sector at an advertising firm here in Des Moines, worked with business development to improve the state's business climate, so that's a great background for her legislature experience upcoming, and also worked for U.S. Senator Tom Harkin. Again, our paths are crossing a little bit. When I got out of broadcasting, I interviewed to work for Harkin's office in Washington. Matter of fact, my recollection is that I could have had that job, but didn't want to leave the area. Did you stay here, or did you go to Washington? Or
yeah, I interned in his office during college, in his D.C. office in '94, and absolutely loved that. I worked in the press office there and kind of got hooked. And then when I came back, I worked on his '96 re-election campaign here in Des Moines, here in Iowa. And I didn't want to go to Washington, so I didn't stay to work for Senator Harkin after that because I wanted to stay here.
Well, I got to ask you right off the top, have you encountered this? This was on an earlier podcast, this American Disabilities Act thing. Tom Harkin's, the thing that probably he would hang his hat on as far as his Senate career is concerned, George H.W. Bush seemed to be getting all the credit for signing that legislation. Did you notice that?
I did.
Yeah,
I did.
Did you remark to people about that, or are other people aware of the fact that Harkin was the guy that authored that and pushed that through Congress?
Certainly here in Iowa they are.
Yeah.
So certainly in Iowa people understand that. He's a civil rights pioneer without question when it comes to rights for Americans with disabilities. And I think most Iowans know that for sure. And I think that George Bush certainly signed it. But long in the future, I hope when Tom Harkin leaves us, that will be his legacy and one of the first lines of his obituary, I am sure of it, because that's his greatest achievement.
Yeah.
And it's his. He worked it through.
Piece. And everybody made a big deal about the fact that Bush signed it. And I said, was he not going to sign it? How would that have looked?
Right.
I mean,
right.
How would that have gone over?
And he would have had a lot of pressure from business, but Senator Harkin was able to work across the aisle and get the business community to also understand the importance and to find the justification for it.
Yeah. Just to wrap up the background a little bit, again, where we're crossing paths, you're here with your husband and family in the metro area. Your dad's Mike Glover
Yes.
of the AP.
Yes.
And he was at the AP when I was in broadcasting. And so I don't know, it's kind of funny how these things, these synergies come together. I'm very bemused by all of that. Well, anyway, I want to start off the podcast by congratulating you on the win to the Iowa legislature and thanking you. Because here's the thing. Going back a couple of decades ago, when all of this right-wing Republicanism fervor started to really percolate, what they did was, now this is a little bit of editorializing on my part, but they reached out to a lot of folks, and particularly the evangelical wing of the Republican Party. And they said, grab your guns, grab your Bibles, jump in your four-wheel drive pickup that's big enough to scale the Himalayas, that gas guzzler, and run down to your school boards and your legislatures and become a candidate. Get in there and change the world to the way that we would like to have it. And you know what? They did it. And guys like me at the time who were involved with themselves, which I've been accused of in the past, and their careers, and people that have attention deficit disorder, like me, people that don't like to sit in meetings, people that can't handle passive-aggressive behavior, we didn't do that. We lost that battle. That battle has been won to a certain extent, and it's responsible for what we all have today, including up to Donald Trump. You agree or disagree with that?
So I agree that the Republicans were very smart for decades in terms of building a bench and getting folks at state legislatures, school boards, city councils, boards of supervisors to build that bench to get ready for both national prominence, but also to affect change at the local level, which is where I think it's really important and possible.
Yes.
Definitely agree they've been better at that than Democrats have been. I will say that the battle may have been lost, but I was just thinking about this on the drive here, that the war certainly continues. And
well, it's being rejoined because of you.
Yeah.
And people like you in this most recent election. That little blue ripple that we felt, and it wasn't a wave necessarily, but a ripple. You're young. You're a woman. You're progressive. Yeah. You're exactly what they need and what they were looking for and hopeful would happen, and you did.
I hope so. That's nice, but you know, I certainly feel like I'm standing on the shoulders of a lot of other folks, of course, who laid the groundwork for this, made it possible to sort of allow women like me, working moms, busy people, working professionals, to be able to do this kind of work and continue our careers. But I will say that, this is the first time our district's ever been represented by a Democrat.
Yeah.
And probably, from what we can tell, the first time it's ever been represented by a woman. And so it's time. It's overdue. And a lot of seats in Polk County flipped. You know, Democrats gained 5 seats in central Iowa that were Republican seats. And that's huge. And so I think it makes a big difference that those of us, one lesson I've learned is that it's worth trying again, right? It's worth running again, because I lost last time by 500 votes and I wasn't going to run again, ever again. And then that was November. In February, I was like, I'm in, because I saw what the legislature was doing and it felt like a bait and switch. And so I decided it was time to put my hat in the ring again.
Well, thank God. Thank you. I mean, really,
well, thank you.
Seriously, right off the top, I want to say that. So
Thanks.
Let's take a look at your district. Let's talk about Iowa and the issues. Mm-hmm. When you go around and talk to your constituents, all the campaigning, door knocking, meetings, all of those things that you do, what's top of mind right now?
Right now, healthcare is huge.
Yeah.
Healthcare continues to be a huge issue. It was what I heard most of the doors without question, and that includes mental health. Mental health is a big issue at the doors. People are very concerned about mental health, addiction, physical health, paying for things, paying for co-pays for healthcare, et cetera. And, my family, we had this summer I had to have my gallbladder removed somewhat unexpectedly, and my out-of-pocket limit was $2,000. So, a month before we sent our daughter to college, we got a bill for $2,000 for my gallbladder. And, we're a middle-class family who could swing it, but it was hard on us. And there are families who can't. And it's a very real situation that so many Iowans are facing. So healthcare is huge, absolutely huge. People are also very concerned about education, which is the reason I got into this race in the first place. Education's a very big issue with these folks, and they really care. They're starting to see the impact of underfunding our schools for years and years and years.
Yes.
Iowa, when I was in third grade, my mom, my parents are divorced. My mom sent me to Iowa to live with my dad because the schools were so much better up here.
Yes.
And so I came back to Iowa for the schools. And that's why we're here to raise our kids. And our schools are doing as well as they can under the current circumstances. But they've been underfunded for so long.
It used to be the Iowa identity. I mean, other than the Hawkeye football team or something, it's a thing we were known the best
schools
for.
are. And, the people on the ground, the people who are taking care of our kids, the people who are teaching, the administrators, they're doing the best they can. I firmly believe that, and I've seen it. But when you've got 10 more kids in your class, that's pretty hard to manage. I mean, my son's high school PE class had 47 students in it, and they had their class at the same time as another class with 53 students in it. So we had 100 kids in a gym for PE. Now, what are they going to do?
Right.
And that's not the teacher's
Can't
fault.
even play dodgeball.
Right. Thank goodness. Yeah. Because dodgeball's kind of scary. But yeah, I mean, and so I think education is a really big concern for families, and paying for college. That's huge.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So these friendly doors, did you have to prompt them to talk on these issues, or did they want to talk about Trump first off, or, I'm just interested in the process, kind of.
So the comparison was pretty interesting to me, because in 2016, I would say voters were pretty disengaged. When I would talk with them, they didn't have an issue. It would be, please go away. We hate politics. We're not interested. I would talk about issues that they care about. Sure, I care about those things too, but they weren't as engaged, I would say. This time, without question, if I would say, are there issues that you care about? They had them ready to go. Whereas last time it was like, it just sort of felt like there was an urgency this election that there wasn't in 2016 among the voters that I talked to in my district. And so I didn't have to prompt them. Sometimes I would say, these are the things I care about, and they'd talk to me. But, then they'd say, oh, yeah, me too. But I much more frequently this time than last time, people brought up issues without prompting.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So every now and then, and I know a little bit about how this electioneering takes place, you're going to end up at an unfriendly door.
Every now and then, yeah.
That happens every now and then. So when you talk to those folks, those issues that you just described, that's not going to be top of mind with them if they'll even volunteer issues. I would think, what they want to talk about is protect my guns, homeschool my children, get rid of Obamacare. They're okay with what's happening with Medicaid in the state of Iowa. And obviously, they have to be all right with giving huge tax breaks and incentives to major corporations in Iowa and millionaires, including farmers. It's hard to say that in an agriculture state. Is that true? Do they want to talk about those things?
No,
no,
not in those terms. I would say that if there are those who I did hit plenty of unfriendly doors, because I talked to a lot of Republican doors who typically were not going to side with me anyway, but I felt like it was an important conversation to have. And I'm glad I did, because now I represent them. They would talk in terms of freedom a lot. They wanted the freedom to make their own decisions. They wanted the freedom to make their own healthcare decisions, their own education decisions. And it was coming from a very, we may disagree with the definition of that, but it was very strongly felt. And it was very...
I'd have to ask them, what freedoms are you being denied?
Well, right. They would say the freedom to educate their children the way they want to educate them, the freedom to have, to protect their families the way they want to protect them, the freedom to make their own healthcare decisions, right? All those things that it's just a definitional issue.
And I love this podcast because it gives me an opportunity to editorialize and state my opinions. One of the things I don't hear said very often, and I'm sure that you're aware of this, but I don't know if anybody mentioned this, one of the biggest benefits, maybe the biggest benefit of public education, having everybody in the public education pool, is the socialization factor of it, so that you grow up with a worldview, so that you grow up around other people for anything, just to experience what other people are like, so that you don't end up in this negative downward spiral cycle that we're involved in. And that, to me, is why you want your kids to go to public schools.
Yeah, I mean, I think that certainly, I think homeschools, there have been networks of homeschools that have been built up that have really tried to address that issue of socialization. Certainly private schools have tried to do that too. I'm not against per se the idea of homeschooling or the idea of private schools. I mean, Dowling is in my district. I'm a big believer in parents being able to make those choices. I just don't want tax dollars to go to them. I don't feel like we should be, until public schools are fully funded, I don't think we should be funding private schools or homeschools.
That reminds me, I was going to put this on a podcast at Christmas. It reminded me, I was in a sixth grade class, as I recall, and public schools, and we came back from Christmas break, and everybody told what they did on Christmas break, maybe even what you got for presents, which is terrible for guys. They should never have done that because some kids don't have very much,
right.
And this one little boy in sixth grade that had just joined us, and he was living in one of these almost old abandoned farmhouses out on a dirt road, I remember, because we rode the school bus together. They asked him what happened over his holiday break. And he stood up and said, well, my dad got drunk and drove the car off the end of the driveway in the ditch. And my mom went out there, and the state troopers came, and they arrested him and took him to jail. And I remember even back then thinking, wow, what a change from the other kids, what they had to report for. And, but they would never have been aware of his world if it hadn't been public school.
Well, and I think the equalizer of public schools. So there are kids who, when they get back to school on Monday in the Des Moines Public Schools, they'll have their first hot meal since before Christmas. Yeah. They'll have the first time that somebody really shows them genuine concern and care since before Christmas. And thank God, really, for public schools and the fact that they have the opportunity to have what they need in a place that's safe. And so, I mean, they are, the fact that we want to live in an educated society is one argument for public schools, but the other is that it does provide that safety net that so many people say is missing right now, and that is that teachers are having to, and they're doing it willingly, but having to be social workers and caretakers and do all the things that go beyond just teaching reading and writing. And that's wonderful, but we really need to have more staff in the schools who can actually address those issues and allow teachers to do the teaching.
Definitely.
And that's one of the places that have been cut. Going back to the door knocking situation, I will tell you one story. It's not to say that those issues that you mentioned never come up. There was a person I talked with who said, well, the only issue I care about is gun rights. And I said, okay, that's fine. Then you're going to want to vote for my opponent because we probably don't agree on gun rights. And we had a nice conversation, very civil conversation about where we felt things were and what he wanted versus what I advocated for. And I said, so probably I'm going to say vote for my opponent. And he claimed at the time, well, I'm going to vote for you because you were honest with me. And though I know he didn't, I'm quite sure he did not. At the moment, it did feel like one of those times when just being honest with each other actually led to some sort of a agree to disagree situation. And that's why I think door knocking and having those conversations and meeting with constituents and talking with folks regularly is so important, because you can see the humanity in someone else, and you can see that you think one thing and I think a different thing, but we both have the same goals. We both want our family to be well taken care of and happy. We both want to have jobs we care about and love and can provide for our families. We all have the same goals, and we might disagree on how to get there, but until we can understand those shared goals, we're not going to get very far. And I think that's what we've seen, right, in the last 2 decades.
That's great. I'm reminded that I've got an upcoming podcast here, and I'm going to have Cindy Axney on.
Oh, great. She's wonderful.
Yeah, to do the podcast. And I'm going to kind of ask you the same question that I'm going to ask her, and it's a little more relevant for her maybe. But you're dealing with a House district. Is it a small district or not? Are they
no. And it's grown really since the last time they were reapportioned after 2010. And so, I'm not 100% sure of the numbers, but we're supposed to each represent 30,000 people, and I think I'm representing a few more than that. While some districts have lost population. So
okay, so an Iowa House district. Kind of local, if you want to look at it that way.
Sure.
But I'm reminded, I first saw this back in the 80s. Maybe I was just becoming aware. Maybe it's always been this way. But I remember, Reaganism. And I remember, vote for this guy because he's the kind of guy that you'd like to have a beer with. Right. And I remember at the time saying, no. I mean, I drink beer. Yeah. I hang around guys that drink beer. I don't want those guys for president. That's dumb. That is a dumb idea. Don't go there. And the other thing that they would do is when you get together with your legislator, whatever, up to and including the president, Find out what they're going to do for you. Discuss things that are important to you. Do a quid pro quo, with these elected representatives. And I used to no. It's what's good for the most, for the many, and then for the few. So you have to kind of something that's good for somebody in your district in Iowa. It may not be good for the rest of us. May not be good for the state.
Right.
May not be good for the country. Are you cognizant of that? Is that part of the?
You certainly hope, right, that that you can find a common ground. But my first priority is to the 30,000 or so people I represent in this district. And so the issues that I'm going to talk about revolve around the issues that suburban Des Moines families care about.
I'm interested in that. Is your first responsibility the people in that district, or is it the world?
Well,
and coming back from that.
When it comes to voting and when it comes to, I feel, and it's philosophical, I feel like that my first responsibility is to make sure that the people who elected me to represent them are being heard at the Capitol, right? And so my first responsibility is to serve them. However, if I find that it is counter to what the big picture needs, certainly, then that becomes a philosophical question. And I think my important responsibility is to go back to those constituents and say, here's why I think we need to do something different.
Yeah.
And so I think the problem becomes that people get disconnected from their precincts, from their districts, and forget to tell them why they're making the decisions they're making. And so I'm a believer, and until I hear otherwise, I'm going to continue to believe this, that there's compromise and middle ground to be found. And I think our politics are way too black and white, and I think we need to find shades of gray and work there. And it's, I work and I teach persuasion and trying to identify to someone why something is good for them, even if it's not automatically apparent, is a really important part of this conversation, I think, right? So telling people that, I'm not one of these Democrats who's going to say, I will always be opposed to incentives for corporations to come to my community. I don't feel like that's a responsible thing to say in a suburban district that draws those companies. And so what I say is I want accountability attached to those dollars. I want to use them wisely and sparingly. I want to make sure that those people will really do the jobs that they say they're going to hire, that they'll really do the things for the community they say they're going to do. But I'm not going to blanket say never, right? And so for me, I feel like explaining to those who might be opposed to any tax incentives ever for corporations, explaining to them that there's accountability built in, that I believe that we'll hire these certain number of jobs and it's good for our community, is a way to have that conversation. Now, I want to be much more careful about the way we issue tax incentives. I want to make sure that our tax dollars are being used wisely and that education is funded first and that the things that we need in the state are funded first. But I'm never going to – it's very hard for me to say never about a lot of things because as I've learned, there's a lot more nuance in this business, in this world, than our politics lead us to believe.
Right. It's not that simple in a lot of respects. I go back to Ross Perot. I mean, he was a big champion. You just got to get under the hood. You just got to tinker. No.
Right.
Trump does that all the time. You just need to – no, it's not that simple. Okay, let's talk about a local issue here that it's right into this framework that we're talking about. I think it's interesting. Now, Windsor Heights, isn't that the community that had the sidewalk deal? Okay. So they need sidewalks. Sidewalks are good. People like sidewalks, by and large. I mean, it sounds good, but it costs homeowners money. You meet with constituents, you're door knocking. Their number one issue is, hey, I don't want to pay for a sidewalk in front of my house. Mm-hmm. So
it's a city issue. So those decisions are made at the city level, and it's a very divisive issue in my district. And I would say that those who support sidewalks say that it's for the greater good, right? It allows students to walk to school more safely. It allows people to walk more safely. Some homeowners say, I don't want to pay for a sidewalk in my yard. The compromise that the city came up with this last time was the city will pay for those sidewalks that they built, and they built a limited number of them. It's one of those situations where very few people were happy, right, at the end of the day. But I think you could probably... Again, that's one of the circumstances where you could argue both sides, but I think the number one thing is to listen to the constituents of the city who were going to be affected by the sidewalks and actually listen to them.
Yeah, maybe I'm different from other people, and I've been poor before. I mean, I grew up poor. I understand poverty and not having much money, But somebody tells me that we're going to put in sidewalks. We need you to pay for it, at least pay for a significant portion of it, and it's going to benefit all those other people. Even if I don't use the sidewalk in front of my house that much, I'm probably for it. But some folks, not so much.
Well, I would argue, and I wouldn't argue this, but I've heard people who have argued that part of it is because of the way that they feel the city approached it at the very beginning, which was, maybe not as transparent way back in the day as they could have been. I don't really know where they are now. I just know that there certainly could have and should have been better communication about the entire issue earlier on in the process.
Yeah.
But I'm not touching the sidewalk issue. I'm not taking a side on that one.
It's
Not
very
on your
local.
life, man.
Okay.
That's a city issue.
Well, before we wrap up, I wanted to just basically touch on the journalism background.
Yes.
That's a recurring theme on my podcast by George. That's my background as well. When it comes to being a legislator with that journalism background, I hear you. You're very articulate. You're very smart. You have a very good command of the language and issues. But a lot of what I hear coming out of the legislative echo chamber is people, representatives from local to national, voting on beliefs, voting on literally how they feel, not how they think, not how they learn, not how they investigate, but based on beliefs and feelings. Is that going to be an issue?
So here's what I think. I hope not. I hope that, I try to keep emotion out of these issues, though I do get pretty cranky about some things. So anger is one that may come up, but I'm not going to vote on that, right? So, I think that because this affects people's daily lives, emotion comes into this so much that you can't take it out of the way. But I think it's important to listen to the core issues underneath that emotion and try to figure out, okay, but what's really happening here, right? And so from a journalism perspective, we always are taught to dig and to figure out motivations. And the thing that I tell my kids and that I'm trying to follow too is not to assume intent.
Kids in the classroom, kids at home?
Both.
Yeah, okay.
All of them. Don't assume intent. So if somebody does something, it's very easy to assume they did it for this reason. You might be right, but you might not be. And so when you start assuming intent on someone's behalf, then you've taken it down a road that you can't be comfortable defending. And so if you stood here and you broke my window in my office, I could assume it was because you were mad, but it might be that you were hot and you wanted cool air to come into my office. And I could get mad at you, but once I find out that it was that reason, then I can say, oh, we've got another way to solve this, right?
Yeah.
And so emotion plays into this a lot, but there's got to be some digging. There's got to be some investigation. So do I think I'll vote on emotion? I sure hope not. I don't intend to. But what I really want to do is vote based on what I think is the best policy. We'll see if I can stick to it, but that's my plan.
Yeah. I hope you can fit all of these things in. You're a busy person. My God.
Yeah, I think the business probably will not be a big priority here in the next few months.
So when's it all start?
January 14th, we're sworn in, but it started November 7th. I started getting phone calls. So,
well, you'll be well underway probably by the time I get this podcast.
Sure.
But I want to wish you all the best. We'll
Thank
follow
you.
along. We'll revisit this. We'll come back.
I'd love it.
Yeah, because you're a good podcast guest, let me tell you.
Thank you.
This has gone great.
Awesome.
Jennifer Konfrst. She's one of the most newly elected representatives to the Iowa House of Representatives and has a great career, and this has been a lot of fun. I appreciate everybody listening in. Again, I got to do this at the end of every show. Encourage folks to like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, look for us on Spotify, Google Play. The podcast is everywhere, folks, so check it out, and we'll be back, I hope, with Jennifer very soon. And that's another podcast by George.